Good morning and welcome to the Soulfully Sustainable radio show with Mandy. You're listening to my first official recording as a podcast today. Today is October 9th, and yesterday was Magic Monday, which is normally when I host a radio show on Jess FM. Making a choice yesterday not to do the radio show because I didn't feel the impulse was where I was at. So sitting here this morning as I'm easing into my day and my soon coming routine of my life as my children are back in school on this Thanksgiving Tuesday, I felt the impulse to start to record my very first episode, of a podcast. I've made the decision that rather than going into the studio for Jess FM, that I would be recording exactly where I'm at, wherever I'm at in the world. And one of the things that's been really important in my life, one of the things that allows the greatest ease and flow for me is in my creations, creating exactly that, ease and flow. And when things become difficult or disjointed or quite tight time framed, we'll say, that doesn't feel sustainable, nor does it feel regenerative to me. And so I make those changes. And this method of recording weekly and having special guests and really just the creation of the Soulfully Sustainable radio show feels like I need to leave a little more space and time, and I need a little more flexibility, and I need that ease and flow in order that I can continue doing it on a regular or semi-regular basis. So here we are today on October 9th. I woke up to the most incredible white snowfall here in Monarch, Alberta. I really feel sometimes like I'm the only person on the planet who really appreciates and can feel the magic of the snow, especially the first snows. There's something nostalgic inside of me. The child inside of me erupts when I see and I can feel and I can smell that moisture out in my yard. And so I went out this morning to feed my chickens and trudge through the snow with my boots, as I often do in the mornings, especially in the winter, and was admiring my garden space and the transition of the leaves starting to droop and they're frozen, and so therefore they're a different color. I was admiring what I had left in the garden and didn't actually, sort of winterize. I still have all kinds of carrots and lettuce and beets, and my Brussels sprouts are out there as well. And this is new for me to be growing Brussels sprouts. So I had this, this thought this morning as I was looking at it of, oh man, there's another disappointment, something I didn't get to. Albeit I know they do well in a little bit of frost. I'm not sure that they've done well with the hard frosts that we've had in the past while. And so that's where I'm at this morning, admiring the transition of my garden space, and as I catch myself being hard on myself, as I catch myself judging what I've done or not done according to, the rules of gardening and the rules of winterizing, it offers me this beautiful foundation to relax into. It offers me this point of conversation, this ability to check in with myself, and this ability to really decide, okay, is it meaningful enough for me to get my, winter stuff on now and go hack down the plants that I need to and bring them in, even if I could. And it's just another choice point for my life. And so when the experience of sustainability is integrated into my everyday experience, these are the conversations I have with myself. Something arises, especially when there's a should attached to the other end of it. Anytime I'm shoulding myself, oh, I should have done that, or I should have done this, or somebody else is expecting me to do this or that, or I know that I am turning an external reference point inside of me. I'm choosing someone else's rules, or I'm engaging in that old pattern. And what I know of my world and what I've chosen for myself is that I will live my life from an internally referenced place, which means that instead of looking outside for all the rules and the regulations and the cultural beliefs and values and attitudes around a certain thing, I turn inward and I ask myself, what feels right? What feels meaningful? Do I have an impulse here? And these simple conversations that are woven in my everyday living of which tea to have a choice of drinking, looking at my garden, like I said earlier, kind of deciding, how I want to approach it now that we've transitioned into what feels like skipping fall and moving directly into winter. So it's not separate. My evolution, my sustainability, my regeneration, my self-sourcing comes from all of these individual and oftentimes what appears to be mundane decisions or mundane experiences. And I think that's what's unique about how I live and some of the folks that I know is that the content of our lives do not necessarily matter. They just become launch points for what is triggered inside of us. And it allows us to feel a little bit deeper and we can choose whether or not to listen to ourselves or to take on somebody else's rules or to ignore ourselves, but it forces that choice point to happen. And that for me is real and it's authentic and it requires a great deal of mindfulness and presence. And so I wasn't sure what today's podcast was going to be about, but as I start to listen to myself as the words sort of fall out of me and the impulses is here to speak, I can feel this concept of power in our own lives. I can feel these notions of who's in charge, these notions of I'm a grown person and all the times and the places and spaces where I have not felt in control of my life or out of control or powerless. I've come to know this concept of control very, very differently in the last 7, 8, 9 years. And I'm still confronted with my view of power and control on a daily, weekly basis. I think one of the biggest gifts my children are to me is the replication of power and control and the illusions and the delusions surrounding my experience of it. What I know for myself or what I've learned is that there's so much of my history, there's so much of how I was raised and the rules I was taught, both in my family system and in my school system and, in my, I won't say church system because I didn't go to church a whole lot, but just all of these sort of micro pockets of cultural conditioning that we receive throughout my experience of all of those different places. The common theme always was that I need to abide by the rules set forth in those institutions, in those experiences, in those families. And it was never posed as this is my life and I'm the creator of my own life and therefore I choose for myself. And so what happens as a result of that old paradigm, when we're told what to do and how to do it, and we look to others for the cues that we require in our own lives, is we end up giving up control. We end up giving up our own personal power. And that starts to perpetuate this powerless feeling, this sort of hands up in the air, exhaustion, followed very closely by shame and guilt and fear on the other end of it. And one of the ways that I've been able to recognize that pattern of behavior and make the changes is by noticing inside of me when I'm triggered and I feel like I'm not 40 years old or 35 years old, when something or someone says or does something that causes emotions and feelings, we'll say, or energy and information to be in flow in my body, especially when it's intense and it's angry and I feel fearful or I feel shameful. When it's a really, massive trigger, I can really start to feel, how does this feel? What is running my bus right now? And I can feel back to being 8 or 10 or 12 years old and feeling helpless and feeling like I can't change what's about to happen. And as an adult, it's a scary position to be in. As someone who's tall and has a job and raises children and, going back to that 8 or 10 or 12-year-old self is extra scary because we don't feel like we have control over a situation. We are triggered by our automatic response of something or some event or some trauma in the past. And so I've started to recognize these moments when they happen, because what happens on the other end of feeling powerless for me, what happens on the other end of feeling helpless for me, is I lash out. I lash out or I shut down. I totally curl into myself, or I rage on someone else. And those are all in an attempt to equal the playing field and get that power and control back in my life. And it's disruptive, it's chaotic, it's dramatic. And if I don't weave stories about other people when I feel like that, then I'm left with my own experience of feeling young and incapable and helpless. So part of my resiliency in my world, and part of how I've chosen to be present and be 40 and not 8 and 9, is when those moments occur, I follow a process called so funny. So my friend Louise Lebrun of the Wells Systems Institute, I had the good fortune to find myself in some of her experiences about 8 or 9 years ago, and they have profoundly changed my life. She offers a point of view that's in addition to the current reality about who and what we are as human beings. And part of what I've learned from this, I almost said technology, but part of what I've learned from this culmination of experience and knowledge is that my body is a quantum biological processor, which means that it is designed to break down what you would call feelings and emotions. I call them energy and information. And in part, I was taught to call them energy and information because there's no attachment to energy and information. I don't have rules about that like I do feelings and emotions, good emotions, bad emotions, scary emotions, safe emotions. And part of coming to know myself as quantum biological, meaning that my device is designed to break down this energy and information as I'm triggered, as I feel quote unquote fearful, or as I feel quote unquote helpless or out of control or powerless, is to not assign a value to it and then work with my device. So I soften my device, I soften my belly, I soften my shoulders, I give my brain something to think about, which is indeed that. Is my belly soft? Are my shoulders relaxed? And then I allow the wave to travel through my body in whatever way that or form that takes place in. So sometimes that's tears, sometimes that's heat, sometimes that's restriction, sometimes that's vibration, sometimes that's shaking, sometimes that's sweating. All of these different experiences in my body, but trusting that my body knows what to do with it. So what happens is that wave on the, I am that wave. So the essence of who I am is traveling through my body, and what I would have called anger or rage or happiness or sadness in the past, I don't assign those words to, and I just soften my device. I soften my body. I make space and time for it. So sometimes I'm in the middle of a store and I choose to go back to my car. Sometimes I'm in the middle of the car with all my children there, and I start engaging different types of breath to allow my body to soften, to allow that energy and information to be in flow and not restrict it. And that is how I'm able to stay fully present as a 40-year-old. So as that wave moves through my body and I soften into it, it disappears. No longer does it have to come back and try to grab me again like our feelings and our emotions typically do. There's some people who believe that trauma and abuse and all of those things, all of our memories from our lifetime sit somewhere in our tissues. What I think I know for myself now is that those feelings and emotions and energy and information sit because we've tethered them to beliefs and values and attitudes somewhere in the energetic framework of my body. And as I'm triggered by music or smell or something somebody says or the facial movements that somebody makes, as I'm triggered and I relive that, when I make space for it, it's no longer tethered to those things in the same way. My body reconfigures, kind of like software on a computer. It reconfigures itself, and then I no longer have to live that layer of that experience. Rather than shutting it down, locking my jaw muscles, choking back my tears, keeping it locked away somewhere in my gut to be exploded on somebody else later on or on myself. And so that is that is my model of the world. My model of the world is that I am a quantum biological being and that I create my reality. Whether I'm mindful of what I'm creating or not is irrelevant. We all create our own reality. We all live in our own realities. And perception and perspective and opinion all show us indeed that. Part of what's happened in my own personal life with my partner and my children is in my recognition that my life is about me and yours is about you, we end up being able to take back that power and control because it's no longer about somebody else. I no longer have to weave stories about it. I know that everything that triggers inside of me is about me and for me, and it's to be coveted and loved and held and surrendered to. It's not for my partner to make choices about or tell me what to do or how to do it, or for me to lash out and blame him for the things that are moving through me. And so it's offered this sometimes difficult opportunity to have conversation or acknowledge it for ourselves, but it's also offered these sweet surrenderings, these sweet letting goes and relaxing into for us in heated moments. So what would typically be drama and drug out and oh my gosh, he said this and then she said that and this is where we are, has been replaced by long, softening, deep breaths, sometimes a little space away until we can allow the device to calm itself. And this isn't a technique of breathing to calm myself. It's a the technique, if you will, is my body soft? Are my shoulders relaxed? And allowing it, the wave to move in whatever fashion it needs to. And by doing that, the byproduct of that is I feel powerful. I feel like I'm in control of my life. I feel like my life is mine to live and nobody else can interfere in that no matter what they do. And that restored a freedom that I did not have as a young girl or a teenager or even a young adult. It's restored my own capabilities and knowing I'm capable and knowing that I'm enough. I think one of the common themes I hear when I gather with women in the world is there's always this underlying belief, and I say women, but I mean men too. I had a very intense experience with my partner yesterday, and the crux of all of it was feeling like you're not enough. And those messages are stored in us from a very early age. And I'm not blaming my parents. I'm not blaming your parents. I'm saying that the enculturation that we experience, the beliefs, values, and attitudes, the models of the world that are installed into us like software, because that's what happens through the parenting process, is what we come to believe is true and real about everything. And we don't have a choice about that when we're little. And so in our parents' attempts to have us have good manners and be well-behaved, good citizens of this planet, of this community, we're taught obedience and control. And if we don't abide by those things in the ways that are expected, then we are punished and we're consequenced somehow, no matter what that looks like in your household. That, it could be a shaming comment, it could be a grounding, it could be a spanking, it could be lots of different things. But the message of that is what you're doing is wrong and it's not good enough. And when we hear those messages over and over again, we start to believe it as a foundation of who we are. So what I've had to discover as a 30 and a 40-year-old woman is my value. My value because I'm here. My value because I'm alive, not because I've done something in a certain way to appease somebody, but my value because I'm here. I'm legitimate and I'm important and I'm whole and I'm unique and I'm essential to my own world because I'm alive. And that's a very different message than we receive with traditional parenting. And again, it's not a criticism of parenting. It's a recognition in my own life that might not have been the whole story. So when I'm triggered and I don't feel enough and I feel shameful or I feel guilty in a moment, I have to sit with that. I have to soften my body and allow those feelings, which are very difficult and very cutting and feel very scary for me. I'm not at all pretending like this is easy, because it's not. It requires deep commitment to self, deep commitment. And it requires some quote unquote yucky feelings to move through my body and allow myself to know that I'm safe Safety is an inside job. I'm safe if I say I'm safe. And so that's been my process of recognizing. So as I have these triggers, as I remind myself or not that I'm a quantum biological being, and that all I need to do is soften, allow it to move, allow myself to know the truth of my experience. So what happens on the other end of a trigger or a wave moving is quite often within 24 to 48 hours, I will know something different. I will have an insight. You know those aha moments, those, oh my gosh, I didn't know that. And you feel goosebumps in your body. Those are beautiful gems. Those are what my friend Louise LeBrun would call green dot moments. Those are knowing and discovering the I don't know that I don't know. And they change your life profoundly because you can't unknow what you know now. So you have this beautiful aha moment. Your body reconfigures like the biological computer system that it is. And then you live your life differently. You make different choices. You don't feel the same way when the guy at Costco snorts at you and you take that a certain way. You internalize that a certain way. And that starts to foster and starts to create a different experience of powerful, of freedom, of my life is about me and I get to create it. And we are no longer trapped in that 8 and 10 and 12-year-old body. We're closer to our actual age. And this process of, well, it's a lot of processes at work, I suppose, here, but this process of the code model, creation out of deep energy, is what Louise calls it. This code model, this way of looking at our physicality, our energetic beings, this way of looking at our quantum biological device, has become the lens through which I filter my world right away. So no matter what moves through me, I remind myself that my body is a biological device and I'm able to create out of that deep energy. So as I surrender to and soften my body does exactly what it needs to do. And there's no effort in that. There's no work in that. So I'm not exhausted. I'm not burnt out. I'm not overwhelmed, as I am in a reality where I have to control an outcome, where I have to leverage relationships to get what I need in order to feel safe, where I have to tell stories about other people in order to make these feelings okay and respectable. If I'm angry and pissed off at my husband, I have to tell stories about him in order to maintain that reality. Whereas if I remind myself that I'm a quantum biological being and I engage this process of code model, then I'm able to soften my body. My body does all the work. And then at some point, my logical brain gets a piece of information and everything shifts. It's easy. It has flow. It's energetic. Therefore, it works very fast. 5 minutes, 2 minutes, I don't know what the stats are, but of 5 minutes of absolute mindfulness and softening and treating myself like the energetic being that I am can undo 10, 20, 30 years of my history. So beliefs and values and attitudes that I've carried since I was a little girl can disappear in the matter of a few days. If I remember this, if I allow my body to do the work, my body can work at an incredible, mind-blowing speed. I don't remember again what the stats are, but it's several trillion bits of energy per second can be digested and broke down and changed inside of my body as a device. My brain can only manage plus or minus, I think it's like 7 interactions in that amount of time. And so I guess what I'm saying is the stats aside is that my brain is a very slow process. If I have to calibrate for my physical world and what's happening and she said this and I said that and the beliefs that I have inside of me, that's an exhausting experience. What is regenerative and soul fulfilling is this understanding of the cold model and the fact that I am a biological being. And as a biological being, I have access to so much more and so much more faster and so much more richer and so much more easier. So I suppose today's podcast is really about who I am and where I come from and my model of the world. And I think it's important to know that, not as a fixed reality or a fixed truth, not as a Mandy is this or Mandy is that. But if you understand how I view my world, then you will understand how the Soulfully Sustainable radio show or podcast is different. If I have a guest on the show and we're discussing something, the preface always is that my life is about me and yours is about you. And then it becomes this, rather than this, I'm right and you're wrong, and here's one view and this is not as good as that view, and here's the reasons why, which I so often hear. There is no judgment one way or the other. It's that I show up fully in the essence of who I am, and my guest shows up fully in the essence of who they are, and we find these beautiful common grounds to come together with, and that neither of us is quote unquote compromising who we are for the sake of agreeance, for the sake of being cordial, for the sake of being polite. That doesn't happen. We can have completely different views of the world, and in that I can find an amazing respect for what the other is saying. And if I'm triggered, I know that's about me. If I really, really disagree and I find anger or frustration or disappointment rearing its ugly head, I recognize that that's energy and information. I soften my body. I allow myself to breathe. So one of the things you'll find in my podcasts is that I have long periods of breath or a few seconds of silence, which I'm realizing in this moment hasn't happened yet. This is all just kind of flowing out of me. But that is how I live from day to day. And so I'm really, really excited about this next step of the Soulfully Soil podcast. I'm really excited about the folks who have already been in contact with me about coming onto the show. We're going to talk about sustainability and regeneration, self-sourcing, resiliency. We're going to talk about how that is not only a technique when we're growing food, when we're building our houses, when we're creating energy systems or communities, but also how it affects our day-to-day lives as an integrated experience. Not a philosophy that we talk about outside of ourselves, but an experience that we have moment to moment, breath to breath, in the little mundane parts of our world, in the absolutely chaotic, bring you to your knees moments of your life, the transition moments. Those are the most beautiful and full and rich and fertile spaces. And so I'm going to invite that. I'm going to invite that of my guests. I'm going to invite that of my listeners. So that's where I stand with the Soulfully Sustainable podcast. So thank you for listening this far. Thank you for allowing me to meander through my thoughts and my ideas and allow them to present in a natural and organic form. I ask that you reach out to me if you have anything to add. If you want to just have a conversation and you want to put yourself out there, please connect with me anytime. So I invite you to watch and listen and feel into your lives as you go into the next week. I want you to feel the pauses and the intense moments. I want you to feel the soul of your life. I want you to feel how it's present or not. I want you to start to identify those places where you give yourself space and time and you honor it, and where you don't. Soulfully Sustainable is about connection to self, and that being easy to maintain. There's no overwhelm in that. When I ask myself, is this meaningful, as the first point of any decision, the rest that follows is rich and powerful and easy. It's not difficult. Yes, I might have tears. Yes, I might have rage. Yes, I might have disappointments. But there's nothing to do. And so I invite you to consider that for your own world. Until next Monday, this is Mandy Sandbach with the Soulfully Sustainable podcast. Please find me on Facebook, as well as my website at soulfullysoil.ca. Drop me a note. Mahalo.